There it goes. Welcome back. Excuse me. Welcome back to Fraggoth Reads. I'm your intrepid narrator, Fraggoth, and today we're going to be reading more of The Rise of Endymion by Dan Simmons. Thank you for tuning in, CE39. Hi, Fraggoth. Good to see/hear you again. Hope you are doing good. I am just a little tired from yesterday. Let's see. What happened last time? So we opened the book with a death, the demise of Pope Julius XIV. And in and amongst this, also known as Lenar Hoyt from the Hyperion, from Hyperion and the Fall of Hyperion. Now, around the death of the Pope is a bunch of politicking. And a number of the Pax Mercantilis. If people have one that they'd rather hear, I'm open to suggestions. I'm going to intermix all three until I hear otherwise. Basically a cabal of the head honchos of the Pax Mercantilis, which is the mercantile division of the Pax. They are the movers and shakers of moving gross domestic product everywhere throughout the Pax space. Basically, I'll get together in a room with Lord Dusamy and basically tell him, hey, it may or may not be time for Julius to no longer be Pope. And if you were to make a bid for it, we would back you. And Lord Dusamy basically says, no. That's not what is going to happen. We are going to back Lenar Hoyt to become the next Pope. Now, meanwhile, in a room to the side, Lenar Hoyt has died. Long live Lenar Hoyt. However, in his place rises Father Paul de Rey, formerly known as Pope Teilhard I, who is then brutally slain by having his throat cut by Lord Dusamy. I forget if he does that after the meeting, I think. Lord Dusamy cuts his throat, has the two Swiss guards who move the body vaporized by Councillor Albedo, and laments that the cutting of the throat always just ruins the sacred vestments, gets them covered in blood. Very stainy stuff, blood. So every time that Pope Julius has died, Teilhard has risen in his place and is then murdered summarily right after it happens. Because he's got the dual crucifix thing going on that we learned about in the previous books. So, meanwhile, on Earth, so this is 4 years have passed. There's a 4-year gap between the end of Endymion and the rise of Endymion. And in those intervening 4 years, Federico de Soya has become just a chaplain, preacher, padre. He preaches to his flock on Madre de Dios. He doesn't get many people there, but he's happy to be doing that and not, blowing stuff up. But unfortunately for him, he gets recalled to duty by, I think it's Margaret Wu, recalls him to duty. He's like, hey, you have been recalled. Come with me. So meanwhile, on Old Earth, where Raul, Aenea, and Bettik have been learning under Frank Lloyd Wright. And so Raul has had some various adventuring, surveying Earth, some other stuff. But their time on Old Earth is coming to an end. And Aenea tells all the people assembled there, hey, it's time for us to go back into the web. go back through the Farcasters to Pax space. And everyone is understandably concerned about this because the Pax are a brutal authoritarian authoritarian theocracy. And, a lot of them are hunted already. Certainly Aenea is. They don't want to die, which is understandable. And Aenea's like, well, this is something we've got to do. We couldn't stay here forever. We've got to go out and spread out. We have to help build their churches, she says. Which seems a little strange, considering the downfall of the Pax is somewhat tied in with at least the mission that Martin Silenus gave Raul, and in part Aenea, though she is decidedly a pacifist and does not wish to harm or kill anyone. So how the Pax would fall is anybody's guess at this point. More on that later. However, for Raul, she has special marching out orders, and that is to leave immediately. And he's like, wait, what? Huh? How can I protect you if, my entire mission has been to safeguard you and, be your companion. And he's got a burgeoning love for this now young woman, which, admittedly is one thing. But on another, he swore to Martin Silenus he'd keep her safe, and how can he do that if he's elsewhere? Well, she's told him he's got to now travel the River Tethys again. But he's going to be doing it alone. However, he is going to have a new handmade kayak that Bettik put together. So he's going to be traveling the River Tethys by kayak. And where we left, he is setting off, I believe. He's setting off down the Mississippi. The wide Mississippi. Today is probably going to be a shorter one than we've been doing. I'm a little fried, and my time is kind of limited. But much like the previous book, we are having perspective shifts, so now we get to see what's going on in Pax World, in the Vatican. There is going to be a lot of interesting internal stuff going on. I don't know if we're going to get to... Oh. This one isn't quite as melodramatic as... Oh no, this one... Okay. So yeah, some good stuff for us. Let me get some water in me and we will proceed. Sorry if I seem a little scatterbrained. It's because I am. The Grand Inquisitor was late. Vatican Airspace Traffic Control routed the Inquisitor's EMV across the normally closed airspace near the spaceport, shut down all airborne traffic on the east side of the Vatican, and held a 30,000-ton robot freighter in orbital final approach until after the GI's car had flown across the southeast corner of the landing grid. Inside the specially armored EMV, the Grand Inquisitor, His Eminence John Domenico Cardinal Mustafa, did not glance out the window or at the video monitors at the lovely sight of the approaching Vatican, its walls rosy in the morning light, or at the busy 20-lane highway called the Ponte Vittorio Emanuele beneath them, glimmering like a sunlit river because of sunlight on windshields and bubble tops. The Grand Inquisitor's attention was focused solely on the intelligence update scrolling by on his comlog template. When the last paragraph had scrolled past and was committed to memory and deleted to oblivion, the Grand Inquisitor said to his aide, Father Farrell, "And there have been no more meetings with the mercantiles?" Father Farrell, a thin man with flat gray eyes, never smiled, but a twitch of his cheek muscle conveyed the simulation of humor to the cardinal. "None." "You're certain?" "Absolutely." The Grand Inquisitor sat back in the EMV's cushions and allowed himself a brief smile. The mercantilis had made only that one early, disastrous approach to any of the papal candidates, the sounding out of Lord Ducemy, and the Inquisitor had heard the complete recording of that meeting. The Cardinal allowed himself another few seconds of smile. Lord Ducemy had been right to think that his conference room was bug-proof, absolutely resistant to taps, bugs, wires, and squirts. Any recording device in the room, even implanted in one of the participants, would have been detected and homed in on. Any attempt to tight beam out would have been detected and blocked. It had been one of the Grand Inquisitor's finest moments, getting the complete visual and auditory recording of that meeting. Monsignor Lucas Oddi had gone into the Vatican hospital for a routine eyes, ears, and heart replacement 2 local years ago. The surgeon had been approached by Father Farrell, and the full weight of the Holy Office had been shown ready to descend upon the poor medico's neck if he did not implant certain state-of-the-art devices in the Monsignor's body. The surgeon did so, and died the true death, no resurrection possible, in a car accident far out over the Big North Shallow shortly after that. Monsignor Lucas Oddi had no electronic or mechanical bugs in his system, but connected to his optic nerve were 7 fully biological nanorecorders. 4 auditory nanorecorders were tapped into his auditory nerve system. These biorecorders did not transmit inside the body, but stored the data in chemical form, and physically carried it through the bloodstream to the squirt transmitter, also fully organic, set into Monsignor Oddi's left ventricle. 10 minutes after Oddi had left the secured area of Cardinal Lord Ducemy's office, the transmitter had squirted a compressed record of the meeting to one of the Grand Inquisitor's nearby relay transponders. It was not real-time eavesdropping from Lord Ducemy's bug-proof rooms, a fact that still worried Cardinal Mustafa, but it was as close to it as current technology and stealth could get. "Isozaki is frightened," said Father Farrell. "He thinks—" The Grand Inquisitor raised one finger. Farrell stopped in mid-sentence. "You do not know that he is frightened," said the Cardinal. "You do not know what he thinks. You can only know what he says and does, and infer his thoughts and reactions from that. Never make unsupportable assumptions about your enemies, Martin. It can be a fatal self-indulgence." Father Farrell bowed his head in agreement and submission. The EMV touched down on the landing pad atop Castel Sant'Angelo. The Grand Inquisitor was out the hatch and down the ramp so quickly that Farrell had to trot to catch up to his master. Security commandos, dressed in Holy Office red armor cloth, fell into escort step ahead and behind, but the Grand Inquisitor waved them all away. He wanted to finish his conversation with Father Farrell. He touched the aide's left arm, not out of affection, but to close the
not out of affection, but to close the bone conduction circuits so that he could sub-vocalize, and said, "Isozaki and the Mercantilist leaders are not frightened. If Lord Dusami wanted them purged, they would be dead by now. Isozaki had to get his message of support to the Cardinal, and he did. It's the Pax military who are frightened." Farrell frowned and sub-vocalized on the bone circuit. "The military? But they haven't played their card yet. They have done nothing disloyal." "Precisely," said the Grand Inquisitor. "The Mercantilus has made its move and knows that Lord Dusami will turn to them when the time comes. Pax fleet and the rest have been terrified for years that they will make the wrong choice. Now they're terrified that they've waited too long." Farrell nodded. They had taken a drop shaft deep into the stone bowels of Castel Sant'Angelo, and now they moved past armed guards and through lethal force fields down a dark corridor. At an unmarked door, 2 red-garbed commandos stood at attention, energy rifles raised. "Leave us," said the Grand Inquisitor, and palmed the door's ID plate, which is spelled, interestingly, Ideyplate, as opposed to just capital letter ID, but ID. ID? ID plate. It's ID. Anyway, the steel panel slid up and out of sight. The corridor had been stone and shadows. Inside the room, everything was bright light, instruments, and sterile surfaces. Technicians looked up as the Grand Inquisitor and Farrell entered. One wall of the room was taken up by square doors, looking like nothing so much as the multi-tiered human file drawers of an ancient morgue. One of those doors was open, and a naked man lay on a gurney that had been pulled from the cold storage drawer there. The Grand Inquisitor and Farrell stopped on either side of the gurney. "He is reviving well," said the technician who stood at the console. "We are holding him just beneath the surface. We can bring him up in seconds." Father Farrell said, "How long was his last cold sleep?" 16 local months, said the technician. 13.5 standard. "Bring him up," said the Grand Inquisitor. The man's eyelids began to flutter within seconds. He was a small man, muscular but compact, and there were no marks or bruises on his body. His wrists and ankles were bound by stick-tight. A cortical shunt had been implanted just behind his left ear, and an almost invisible bundle of microfibers ran from it to the console. The man on the gurney moaned. "Corporal Basson Key," said the Grand Inquisitor. "Can you hear me?" Corporal Key made an unintelligible sound. The Grand Inquisitor nodded as if satisfied. "Corporal Key," he said pleasantly, conversationally, "shall we pick up where we left off?" "How long?" mumbled Key between dry, stiff lips. "How long have I been—" Father Farrell had moved to the technician's console. Now he nodded to the Grand Inquisitor. Ignoring the corporal's question, John Domenico Cardinal Mustafa said softly, "Why did you and Father Captain de Soya let the girl go?" Corporal Key had opened his eyes, blinking as if the light pained him, but now he closed them again. He did not speak. The Grand Inquisitor nodded to his aide. Father Farrell's hand passed over icons on the console disk key, but did not yet activate any of them. "Once again," said the Grand Inquisitor, "why did you and de Soya allow the girl and her criminal allies to escape on God's Grove? Who were you working for? What was your motivation?" Corporal Key lay on his back, his fists clenched and his eyes shut fast. He did not answer. The Grand Inquisitor tilted his head ever so slightly to the left, and Father Farrell waved 2 fingers over one of the console icons. The icons were the icons were as abstract as hieroglyphics to the untutored eye, but Farrell knew them well. The one he had chosen would have translated as crushed testicles. On the gurney, Corporal Key gasped and opened his mouth to scream, but the neural inhibitors blocked that reaction. The short man's jaws opened as wide as they could, and Father Farrell could hear the muscles and tendons stretching. The Grand Inquisitor nodded, and Farrell removed his fingers from the activation zone above the icon. Corporal Key's entire body convulsed on the gurney, his stomach muscles rippling in tension. "It's only virtual pain, Corporal Key," whispered the Grand Inquisitor. "A neural illusion. Your body is not marked." On the slab, Key was straining to raise his head to look down at his body, but the stick-tight band held his head in place. "Or perhaps not," continued the Cardinal. "Perhaps this time we have resorted to older, less refined methods." He took a step closer to the gurney so that the man could see his face. "Again, why did you and Father Captain DeSoya let the girl go on God's Grove? Why did you attack your crewmate, Radamanth Nemes?" Corporal Key's mouth worked until his back teeth became visible. "Fuck you," he managed, his jaws tight against the shaking that was racking him. "Of course," said the Grand Inquisitor, and nodded to Father Farrell. This time, the icon Farrell activated could be translated as "hot wire behind the right eye." Corporal Key opened his mouth in a silent scream. "Again," said the Grand Inquisitor softly, "tell us." "Excuse me, Your Eminence," said Father Farrell, glancing at his comlog, "but the conclave mass begins in 45 minutes. The Grand Inquisitor waved his fingers. "We have time, Martin. We have time." He touched Corporal Key's upper arm. "Tell us these few facts, Corporal, and you will be bathed, dressed, and released. You have sinned against your church and your Lord by betrayal, but the essence of the church is forgiveness. Explain your betrayal, and all will be forgiven." Amazingly, muscles still rippling with shock, Corporal Key laughed. "Fuck you," he said. "You've already made me tell you everything I know under truth tell. You know why we killed that bitch thing and let the child go, and you'll never let me go. Fuck you." The Grand Inquisitor shrugged and stepped back. Glancing at his own gold comlog, he said softly, "We have time. Much time." He nodded to Father Farrell. The icon that looked like a double parenthesis on the virtual pain console stood for Broad and Heated Blade Down Esophagus. With a graceful motion of his fingers, Father Farrell activated it. The Inquisition is alive and well. Oh, more messages. Severo, heyo, frags. No days are best for adventures sci-fi like this. Amen. I have been well, thank you. And hello to you too, Optical Antenna. Thanks for tuning in. Father Captain Federico de Soya was returned to life on Pacem and had spent 2 weeks as a de facto prisoner in the Vatican Rectory of the Legionaries of Christ. The rectory was comfortable and tranquil. The plump little resurrection chaplain who attended to his needs, Father Baggio, was as kindly and solicitous as ever. De Soya hated the place and the priest. No one told Father Captain de Soya that he could not leave the Legionaries' rectory, but he was made to understand that he should stay there until called. After a week of gaining strength and orientation after his resurrection, he was called to Pax Fleet headquarters, where he met with Admiral Wu and her boss, Admiral Marusin. Father Captain de Soya did little during the meeting except salute, stand at ease, and listen. Admiral Marusin explained that a review of Father Captain de Soya's court-martial of 4 years earlier had shown several irregularities and inconsistencies in the prosecution's case. Further review of the situation had warranted a reversal of the court-martial's... I just got lost in the sauce. Further review of the situation had warranted a reversal of the court-martial board's decision. Father Captain DeSoya was to be reinstated immediately at his former rank of captain in Pax's fleet. Arrangements were being made to find him a ship for combat duty.
"Your old torch ship, the Balthazar, is in dry dock for a year," said Admiral Marrowson. "A complete refitting, being brought up to Archangel Escort standards. Your replacement, Mother Captain Stone, did an excellent job as skipper."
"Yes, sir," said DeSoya. "Stone was an excellent exec. I'm sure she's been a good boss." Admiral Marrowson nodded absently as he thumbed through vellum sheets in his notebook.
Yes, he said. "So good, in fact, that we've recommended her as skipper for one of the new planet-class Archangels. We have an Archangel in mind for you as well, Father Captain."
DeSoya blinked and tried not to react. "The Raphael, sir?" The Admiral looked up, his tanned and creased face set in a slight smile.
"Yes, the Raphael, but not the one you skippered before. We've retired that prototype to courier duty and renamed her. The new Archangel Raphael is... Well, you've heard about the planet-class Archangels, Father Captain?"
"No, sir, not really." He had heard rumors on his desert world when bauxite miners had talked loudly in the one cantina in town.
4 standard years, muttered the Admiral, shaking his head.
His white hair was combed back behind his ears.
"Bring Federico up to speed here, Admiral."
Margaret Wu nodded and touched the diski on a standard tactical console set into Admiral Marrowson's wall. A hollow of a starship came into existence between her and DeSoya. The Father Captain could see at once that this ship was larger, sleeker, more refined, and deadlier than his old Raphael.
"His Holiness has asked each industrial world in the Pax to build, or at least to bankroll, one of these planet-class Archangel battlecruisers, Father Captain," said Admiral Wu in her briefing voice. "In the past 4 years, 21 of them have been completed and have entered active service. Another 60 are nearing completion."
The hollow began to rotate and enlarge until suddenly the main deck was shown in cutaway. It was as if a laser lance had sliced the ship in half.
"As you can see," continued Wu, "the living areas, command decks, and C3 tactical centers are much roomier than on the earlier Raphael, roomier even than your old torch ship. The drives, both the classified C+ instantaneous Gideon drive and the in-system fusion plant, have been reduced in size by 1/3, while gaining in efficiency and ease of maintenance. The new Raphael carries 3 atmospheric dropships and a high-speed scout. There are automated resurrection crashes aboard to serve a crew of 28 and up to 22 Marines or passengers."
"Defenses?" asked Father Captain DeSoya, still standing at ease, his hands clasped behind him.
"Class 10 containment fields," said Wu crisply. "The newest stealth technology. Omega-class ECM and jamming ability, as well as the usual assortment of close-in hyperkinetic and energy defenses."
"Attack capabilities?" said DeSoya. He could tell from the apertures and arrays visible on the hollow, but he wanted to hear it. Admiral Marrowson answered with a tone of pride, as if showing off a new grandchild.
"The whole 9 meters," he said. "CPBs, of course, but feeding off the C+ drive core rather than the fusion drive. Slag anything within half an AU. New Hawking hyperkinetic missiles, miniaturized, about half the mass and size of the ones you carried on Balthazar. Plasma needles with almost twice the yield of the warheads of 5 years ago. Death beams."
Father Captain DeSoya tried not to react. Death beams had been prohibited in Pax's fleet. Marrowson saw something in the other man's face.
"Things have changed, Federico. This fight is to the finish. The ousters are breeding like fruit flies out there in the dark, and unless we stop them, they'll be slagging Pachem in a year or 2.
Father Captain DeSoya nodded. "Do you mind if I ask which world paid for the building of this new Raphael, sir?" Marrowson smiled and gestured toward the hollow. The hull of the ship seemed to hurtle toward DeSoya as the magnification increased. The view cut through the hull and closed on the tactical bridge, moving to the edge of the tactical center hollow pit until the Father Captain could make out a small bronze plaque with the name, HHS Raphael, and beneath that, in smaller script, built and commissioned by the people of Heaven's Gate for the defense of all humanity.
Why are you smiling, Father Captain? Asked Admiral Marusin.
Well, sir, it's just... Well, I've been to the world of Heaven's Gate, sir. It was, of course, more than 4 standard years ago, but the planet was empty, except for a dozen or so prospectors and a Pax garrison in orbit. There's been no real population there since the Ouster invasion 300 years ago, sir. I just couldn't imagine that world financing one of these ships. It seems to me that it would take a planetary GNP of a society like Renaissance Vector to pay for a single Archangel.
Marusin's smile had not faltered. Precisely, Father Captain. Heaven's Gate is a hellhole. Poison atmosphere, acid rain, endless mud, and sulfur flats. It's never recovered from the Ouster attack. But His Holiness thought that the Pax's stewardship of that world might be better transferred to private enterprise. The planet still holds a fortune in heavy metals and chemicals. So, we have sold it.
This time, de Soya blinked. Sold it, sir? An entire world? While Marusin openly grinned, Admiral Wu said, To the Opus Dei, Father Captain. Oh, sorry.
To the Opus Dei, Father Captain.
De Soya did not speak, but neither did he show comprehension.
The Work of God used to be a minor religious organization, said Wu. It's, I believe, about 1,200 years old, founded in AD 1920. In the past few years, it has become not only a great ally of the Holy See, but a worthy competitor of the Pax Mercantilis.
Ah, yes, said Father Captain de Soya. He could imagine the mercantilists buying up entire worlds, but he could not imagine the trading group allowing a rival to gain such power in the few years he had been out of the Pax news. It did not matter. He turned to Admiral Marusin. One last question, sir. The Admiral glanced at his comlog chronometer and nodded curtly. I have been out of fleet service for 4 years, de Soya said softly. I have not worn a uniform or received a tech update in all that time. The world where I served as a priest was so far out of the mainstream that I might as well have been in cryogenic fugue the whole time. How could I possibly take command of a new generation Archangel-class starship, sir?
Marusin frowned. We'll bring you up to speed, Father Captain. Pax Fleet knows what it's doing. Are you saying no to this commission?
Father Captain de Soya hesitated for a visible second. No, sir, he said. I appreciate the confidence in me that you and Pax Fleet are showing. I'll do my best, Admiral. De Soya had been trained to discipline twice, once as a priest and Jesuit, again as an officer in His Holiness's fleet. Marusin's stone face softened.
Of course you will, Federico. We're pleased to have you back. We'd like you to stay at the Legionaries' Rectory here on Pachem until we're ready to send you to your ship, if that would be all right.
Damn it, thought de Soya. Still a prisoner with those damned legionaries. He said, Of course, sir. It's a pleasant place. Marusin glanced at his comlog again. The interview was obviously at an end.
Any requests before the assignment becomes official, Father Captain?
De Soya hesitated again. He knew that making a request would be bad form. He spoke anyway. Yes, sir. 1. There were 3 men who served with me on the old Raphael, Swiss Guard commandos whom I brought from Hyperion. Lancer Rettig, well, he died, sir. But Sergeant Gregorius and Corporal Key were with me until the end, and I wondered...
Marusin nodded impatiently. You want them on the new Raphael with you. It sounds reasonable. I used to have a cook that I dragged from ship to ship. Poor bugger was killed during the second coal sack engagement. I don't know about these men.
The Admiral looked at Margaret Wu.
By great coincidence, said Admiral Wu, I ran across their files while reviewing your reinstatement papers, Father Captain. Sergeant Gregorius is currently serving in the Ring territories. I am sure that a transfer can be arranged. Corporal Key, I'm afraid.
De Soya's stomach muscles tightened. Key had been with him around God's Grove. Gregorius had been returned to the creche after an unsuccessful resurrection, and the last he had seen of the lively little corporal had been after their return to Pachem space, when the MPs had taken them away to separate holding cells after their arrest. De Soya had shaken the corporal's hand and assured him that they would see each other again.
"I'm afraid that Corporal Key died 2 standard years ago," finished Wu. "He was killed during an ouster attack on the Sagittarius salient. I understand that he received the Silver Star of St. Michael, posthumously, of course."
DeSoya nodded tersely. "Thank you," he said. Admiral Marosin gave his paternal politician's smile and extended his hand across the desk to DeSoya. "Good luck, Federico. Give them hell from the Raphael." And welcome back, Frank Misers. Thanks for tuning in. The headquarters for the Pax Mercantilis was not on Pacem proper, but was located, fittingly, on the L5 Trojan point trailing behind the planet by some 60 orbital degrees. Between the Vatican world and the huge hollow Taurus Mercantilis, a carbon-carbon donut, 270 meters thick, a full click wide, and 26 kilometers in diameter. Let's try that again. Between the Vatican world and the huge hollow Taurus Mercantilis, a carbon-carbon donut, 270 meters thick, a full click wide, and 26 kilometers in diameter, its interior webbed with spidery dry docks, comm antennae, and loading bays, floated half of Pax Fleet's total orbital-based firepower. Kenzo Isozaki once calculated that a coup attempt launched from Taurus Mercantilis would last 12.06 nanoseconds before being vaporized. Isozaki's office was in a clear bulb on a whiskered carbon flower stem raised some 400 meters above the outer rim of the torus. The bulb's curved hull skin could be opaqued or left transparent according to the whim of the CEO inside it. Today it was transparent except for the section polarized to dim the glare of Pacem's yellow sun. Space seemed black at the moment, but as the torus rotated, the bulb would come into the ring's shadow, and Isozaki could glance up to see stars instantly appear, as if a heavy black curtain had been pulled aside to reveal thousands of brilliant, unflickering candles. "Or the myriad campfires of my enemies," thought Isozaki, as the darkness fell for the 20th time on this working day. With the walls absolutely transparent, his oval office with its modest desk, chairs, and soft lamps seemed to become a carpeted platform standing alone in the immensity of space, individual stars blazing and the long swath of the Milky Way lighting the interior. But it was not this familiar spectacle that made the Mercantilis CEO look up. Set amid the starfield, 3 fusion tails of incoming freighters could be picked out, looking like smudges on an astronomical holo. Isozaki was so adept at gauging distances and delta V's from fusion tails that he could tell at a glance how long it would be before these freighters docked, and even which ships they were. The PM Moldahar effectuator had refueled by skimming a gas giant in the Epsilon Eridani system and was burning redder than usual. The HHMS Emma Constance skipper was in her usual rush to get her cargo of Pegasus 51 reaction metals to the Taurus and was decelerating inbound a good 15% above Mercantilis recommendations. Finally, the smallest smudge could only be the HHMS Elemosinaria. Oh my gosh. Elemosinaria Apostolica. Let's try that again. Finally, the smallest smudge could only be the HHMS Elemosinaria Apostolica, just passing spin down from its C+ transition point from Renaissance system. Isozaki knew this from a glance, just as he knew the 300-some other optimal translation points visible in his part of the Pacem system sky. The lift tube rose from the floor and became a transparent cylinder, its passenger lit by starlight. Isozaki knew that the cylinder was transparent only from the outside. In it, the occupants stood in a mirrored interior, seeing nothing of the CEO's office, staring at their own reflection until Isozaki keyed their door open. Anna Pelliconiani was the only person in the tube. Isozaki nodded, and his personal AI rotated the cube door open. His fellow CEO and protégé did not even glance up at the moving starfield as she crossed the carpet toward him. Good afternoon, Kenzo-san. Good afternoon, Anna. He waved her toward the most comfortable chair, but Konyani shook her head and remained standing. She never took a seat in Isozaki's office. Isozaki never ceased offering her one. The conclave mass is almost over, said Konyani. Isozaki nodded. At that second, his office AI darkened the bubble walls and projected the Vatican's tight beam broadcast. St. Peter's Basilica was awash in scarlet and purple and black and white this morning as the 83 cardinals, soon to be sealed in the conclave, bowed, prayed, genuflected, knelt, stood, and sang. Behind this terna, or herd of theoretically possible candidates for the papacy, were the hundreds of bishops and archbishops, deacons and members of the curia, pax military officials and pax civil administrators, pax planetary governors, and high elected officials who happened to be on Pacem at the time of the Pope's death, or who were within 3 weeks' time debt, delegates from the Dominicans, the Jesuits, the Benedictines, the Legionaries of Christ, the Mariaists, the Salesians. Salesians? Could be Salesians. And a single delegate standing in for the few remaining Franciscans. There were the valued guests in the back rows, honorary delegates from the Pax Mercantilis, the Opus Dei, the Instituto per Opere di Religione, also known as the Vatican Bank, delegates from the Vatican administrative wings of the Prefettura, the Servizio Assistenziale del Santo Padre, the Holy Father's Welfare Service, from the Oh, there's another comma there. Oh my god, it's a list that goes on for literally 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, like 16 lines. And I'm not doing a good job of enunciating when there's a hyphen gapping things out for an explanation. So I'm going to take this puppy from the top, because I can do better. Oh, I know I can do better. St. Peter's Basilica was awash in scarlet and purple and black and white this morning as the 83 cardinals, soon to be sealed in the conclave, bowed, prayed, genuflected, knelt, stood, and sang. Behind this terna, or herd of theoretically possible candidates for the papacy, were the hundreds of bishops and archbishops, deacons and members of the curia, pax military officials and pax civil administrators, pax planetary governors and high elected officials who happened to be on Pacem at the time of the Pope's death, or who were within 3 weeks' time debt, delegates from the Dominicans, the Jesuits, the Benedictines, the Legionaries of Christ, the Mariaists, the Salesians, and a single delegate standing for the few remaining Franciscans. There were the valued guests in the back rows, honorary delegates from the Pax Mercantilis, the Opus Dei, the Instituto per Opere di Religione, also known as the Vatican Bank, delegates from the Vatican administrative wings of the Prefettura, the Servizio Assistenziale del Santo Padre, the Holy Father's Welfare Service, from the APSA, or APSA, the Administration of the Patrimony of the Holy See, as well as from Cardinal Camerlengo's own apostolic chamber. Also in the rear pews were honored guests from the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, the Papal Commission on Interstellar Peace and Justice, many papal academies such as the Pontifical Ecclesiastical Academy, and I wasn't stumbling on the word ecclesiastical, I was stumbling on the fact that I lost what line I was on. I'm going to take that sentence from the top. Also in the rear pews were honored guests from the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, the Papal Commission on Interstellar Peace and Justice, many papal academies such as the Pontifical Ecclesiastical Academy, and other quasi-theological organizations necessary to the running of the vast Pax state. Finally, there were the bright uniforms of the Corps Helvetica, the Swiss Guard, as well as the commanders of the Palatine Guard reconstituted by Pope Julius, and the first appearance of the commander of the hitherto secret Noble Guard, a pale, dark-haired man in a solid red uniform. It's a bumping event. Isozaki and Konyani watched this pageant with knowledgeable eyes. Each of them had been invited to the Mass, but it had become a tradition in recent centuries for the Pax Mercantilis CEOs to honor major church ceremonies by their absence, sending only their official Vatican delegates. Both watched Cardinal... Oh my gosh. Kuznongel. I'm sure it's not pronounced that way, but it is spelled Couesnongle. Kuenongr. Cardinal Kuznongel. I don't know how that's pronounced. I'm not sure if that's Italian or French extraction. Both watched Cardinal Cournongre celebrate this Mass of the Holy Spirit and saw Cardinal Camerlengo as the powerless figurehead he was. Their eyes were on Cardinal Lord Ducemy, Cardinal Mustafa, and half a dozen other power brokers in the front pews. My mic is turned the wrong way. With the final benediction, the Mass ended, and the voting cardinals filed out in solemn procession to the Sistine Chapel, where the holocams lingered while the doors were sealed. The entrance to the conclave was closed, and that door bolted on the inside and padlocked on the outside, and the sealing of the conclave pronounced official by the commandant of the Swiss Guards and the prefect of the pontifical household. The Vatican coverage then shifted to commentary and speculation, while the image remained on the sealed door. "Enough," said Kenzo Isozaki. The broadcast flashed off, the bubble grew transparent, and sunlight flooded the room under a black sky. Anna Pelliconiani smiled thinly. "The voting shouldn't take too long." Isozaki had returned to his chair. Now he steepled his fingers and tapped his lower lip. "Anna," he said, "do you think that we, all of us in the chairmanship of the Mercantilis, have any real power?" Konyani's neutral expression showed her surprise. She said, "During the last fiscal year, Kenzo-san, my division showed a profit of 36 billion marks." Isozaki held his steepled fingers still. Konyani," he said, "would you be so kind as to remove your jacket and shirt?" His protege did not blink. In the 28 standard years they had been colleagues, subordinate and master, actually, M. Isozaki had never done, said, or implied anything that might have been interpreted as a sexual overture. She hesitated only a second, then unsealed her jacket, slipped it off, set it on the chair she never sat in, and unsealed her shirt. She folded it atop her jacket on the back of the chair. Isozaki rose and came around his desk, standing only a meter from her. "Your underthings as well," he said, slipping off his own jacket and unbuttoning his own old-fashioned shirt. His chest was healthy, muscled, but hairless. Konyani slipped off her chemise. Her breasts were small but perfectly formed, rosy at the tips. Kenzo Isozaki lifted one hand as if he were going to touch her, pointed, and then returned the hand to his own chest and touched the double-barred cruciform that ran from his sternum to just above his navel. "This," he said, "is power." He turned away and began dressing. After a moment, Anna Pelliconiani hugged her shoulders and then also began dressing. It was a power move and a bizarre one, but he certainly did a power move there. Very creepy. I would not want him as a boss, based on that behavior. When they were both dressed, Isozaki sat behind his desk again and gestured toward the other chair. To his quiet astonishment, M. Anna Pelliconiani sat in it. "What you are saying," began Konyani, "is that no matter how successful we are in making ourselves indispensable to the new pope, if there ever is a new pope, the church will always have the ultimate leverage of resurrection." "Not quite," said Isozaki, steepling his fingers again, as if the previous interlude had not happened. "I am saying that the power controlling the cruciform controls the human universe." "The church," began Konyani, and stopped. "Of course. The cruciform is just part of the power equation. The Technocore provides the church with the secret of successful resurrection, but they've been in league with the church for 280 years. For their own purposes, said Isozaki softly. What are those purposes, Anna? The office rotated into night. Stars exploded into existence. Konyani raised her face to the Milky Way to gain a moment to think. No one knows, she said at last. Ohm's law. Isozaki smiled. Very good. Following the path of least resistance here may not lead us through the church, but via the core. But Councillor Albedo meets with no one except His Holiness and Lord Dusami. No one that we know of, amended Isozaki, but that is a matter of the core coming to the human universe. Konyani nodded. She understood the implicit suggestion. The illicit, core-class AIs that the Mercantilist was developing could find the datum plane avenue and follow it to the core. For almost 300 years, the prime commandment enforced by the Church and Pax had been, Thou shalt not build a thinking machine equal to or superior to humankind. AIs, in use within the Pax, were more all-purpose instruments than artificial intelligences, of the kind that had evolved away from humanity almost a millennium earlier. Idiot thinking machines like Isozaki's Office AI, or the cretinous ship computer on Desoya's old ship, the Raphael. But in the past dozen years, secret research departments of the Pax Mercantilis had recreated the Of course, there's a line break in the middle of the word, so I don't know what I'm doing. Someone's beeping at me. I'm not going to look at it now. But in the past dozen years, secret research departments of the Pax Mercantilis had recreated the autonomous AIs equal to or surpassing those in common use during the days of the hegemony. The risk and benefits of this project were almost beyond measure. Absolute domination of Pax trade and a breaking of the old balance of power standoff between Pax fleet and Pax Mercantilis, if successful. Excommunication, torture in the dungeons of the Holy Office, and execution, if discovered by the Church. And now, this prospect. Anna Pelliconiani stood. My God, she said softly, that would be the ultimate end run. Isozaki nodded and smiled again. Do you know where that term originated, Anna? End run? No, some sport, I imagine. A very ancient warfare surrogate sport called football, said Isozaki. Konyani knew that this irrelevancy was anything but irrelevant. Sooner or later her master would explain why this datum was important. She waited. The Church had something that the core wanted. Needed, said Isozaki. The taming of the cruciform was their part of the deal. The Church had to barter something of equal worth. Konyani thought, equal in worth to the immortality of 1 trillion human beings? She said, I had always assumed that when Lenar Hoyt and Lord Dusami contacted the surviving core elements more than 2 centuries ago, the Church's bartering point was in secretly re-establishing the technocore in human space. Isozaki opened his hands. To what ends, Anna? Where is the benefit to the core? When the core was an integral part of the hegemony, she said, running the world web and the fat line, they were using the neurons in the billions of human brains transiting the Farcasters as a sort of neural net, part of their ultimate intelligence project. Ah, yes, said her mentor, but there are no Farcasters now. If they are using human beings, how and where? Without meaning to, Anna Pelliconiani raised one hand to her breastbone. Isozaki smiled. Irritating, isn't it? Like a word that is on the tip of one's tongue but will not come to mind. A puzzle with a missing piece. But there is one piece that was missing which has just been found. Konyani raised an eyebrow. The girl? Back in Pax space, said the older CEO. Our agents close to Lord Dusami have confirmed that the core has revealed this. It happened after the death of His Holiness. Only the Secretary of State, the Grand Inquisitor, and the top people in Pax fleet know. Where is she? Isozaki shook his head. If the core knows, they haven't revealed it to the Church or any other human agency. But Pax fleet has called up that ship's captain, Desoya, because of the news. The core had predicted that he would be involved in the girl's capture, said Konyani. The beginnings of a smile were working at the corners of her mouth. Yes, said Isozaki, proud of his student. Ohm's law, said Kognani.
Precisely.
The woman stood and again touched her chest without being aware of doing so.
If we find the girl first, we have the leverage to open discussions with the core, and the means, with the new abilities we will have online.
None of the CEOs who knew of the secret AI project had ever said the words or phrases aloud, despite their bug-proof offices.
If we have the girl and the means of negotiating, continued Kognani, we may have the leverage we need to supplant the church in the core's arrangement with humanity.
If we can discover what the core is getting from the church in return for control of the cruciform, murmured Isozaki, and offer the same or better.
Kognani nodded in a distracted manner. She was seeing how all of this related to her goals and efforts as CEO of Opus Dei.
In every way, she realized at once. In the meantime, we have to find the girl before the others do. Pax fleet must be utilizing resources they would never reveal to the Vatican.
And vice versa,
said Isozaki. This kind of contest pleased him very much.
And we will have to do the same,
said Kognani, turning toward the lift tube.
Every resource. She smiled at her mentor. It's the ultimate three-way, zero-sum game, isn't it, Kenzo-san?
Just so, said Isozaki. Everything to the winner. Power, immortality, and wealth beyond human imagining. To the loser, destruction, the true death, and eternal slavery for one's descendants. He held up one finger. But not a three-way game, Anna. 6.
Kognani paused by the lift door.
I see the fourth, she said. The core has its own imperative to find the girl first, but...
Isozaki lowered his hand.
We must presume that the child has her own goals in this game, mustn't we? And whoever or whatever has introduced her as a playing piece, well, that must be our 6th player.
Or one of the other 5,
said Kognani, smiling. She also enjoyed a high-stakes game. Isozaki nodded and turned his chair to watch the next sunrise above the curving away band of the Taurus Mercantilis. He did not turn back when the lift door closed, and Anna Pellin Kognani departed. So she, I guess, is in charge of Opus Dei, so there isn't really a competition between Pax Mercantilis and Opus Dei. They are colluding, it would seem. Which is kind of an interesting tidbit that's sort of easy to get lost. It's one of the things I find mildly frustrating about this 4th book is, like, there's a lot of really cool shit that we're exposed to as far as how the Pax has been operating this whole time, but there is so little time for it to cook and simmer and be explored. It's pretty great, but it's mildly frustrating. Oh, Brandon CWW says, Hey Frag, hope all is well, still working through Endymion, so can't listen along today. Such a narrative departure from Hyperion, but the man, the myth, the Simmons can do it all. Thanks for continuing with the series and enjoying the new single book format. Excellent. Good. I'm glad that's working out for people. It's working for me, too. Which is nice. Basically what I'm saying is there's nothing actually wrong with Endymion or the rise of Endymion, other than there being a lot of convoluted stuff. But he clearly has so many wild ideas, there's just not enough time for them to be fleshed out as much as I'd like. Basically what I'm saying is, I just want more. And he's done with it, as far as I know. He's pretty well done. He said, like, oh, I want to get back to it sometime, but I'm pretty sure he's like, you know what, I think we're set. And it's understandable. I mean, he's ended the series twice now. With a little coda in the form of Orphans of the Helix, which we'll get to when we get to. It's a short story. Above the altar, Jesus Christ, his face stern and unrelenting, divided men into camps of the good and the bad, the rewarded and the damned. There was no third group. Cardinal Lordusamy sat in his canopied stall inside the Sistine Chapel and looked at Michelangelo's fresco of the Last Judgment. Lord Dusamy had always thought that this Christ was a bullying, authoritarian, merciless figure, perhaps an icon perfectly suited to oversee this choice of a new vicar of Christ. The little chapel was crowded with the 83 canopied stalls seating the 83 cardinals present in the flesh. An empty space allowed for activation of the hollows representing the missing 37 cardinals, one hollow of a canopied stall at a time. This was the first morning after the cardinals had been nailed up in the Vatican Palace. Lord Dusamy had slept and eaten well, his bedroom a cot in his Vatican office, his repast a simple meal cooked by the nuns of the Vatican guest house, simple food and a cheap white wine served in the glorious Borgia apartments. Now all were gathered in the Sistine Chapel, their stall thrones in place, their canopies raised. Lord Dusamy knew that this splendid sight had been missing from the conclave for many centuries, ever since the number of cardinals had grown too large to accommodate the stalls in the small chapel, sometime pre-Hegira, the 19th or 20th century A.D., he thought. But the church had grown so small by the end of the fall of the Farcasters that the 40-some cardinals could once again easily fit. Pope Julius had kept the number small, never more than 120 cardinals, despite the growth of the pax. And with almost 40 of them unable to travel in time to the conclave, the Sistine Chapel could hold the stalls of those cardinals permanently based on Pacem. The moment had come. All of the cardinal electors in the chapel stood as one. In the empty space near the scrutineer's table near the altar, the hollows of the 37 absent cardinal electors shimmered into existence. Because the space was small, the hollows were small. Because the space was small, the hollows were small, little more than doll-sized human figures in doll-sized wooden stalls, all of them floating in mid-air like ghosts of conclave electors past. Lord Dusamy smiled, as he always did, at how appropriate the reduced size of these absent electors seemed. Pope Julius had always been elected by acclamation. One of the 3 cardinals acting as scrutineers raised his hand. The Holy Spirit may have been prepared to move these men and women, but some coordination was required. When the scrutineer's hand dropped, the 83 cardinals and 37 hollows were to speak as one. "Eligo fatherly na hoit," cried Cardinal Lord Dusamy, and saw Cardinal Mustafa shouting the same words from beneath the canopy of his stall. The scrutineer in front of the altar paused. The acclamation had been loud and clear, but obviously not unanimous. This was a new wrinkle. For 270 years, the acclamation had been immediate. Lord Dusamy was careful not to smile or look around. He knew which of the newer cardinals had not cried out Pope Julius's name for re-election. He knew the wealth it had taken to bribe these men and women. He knew the terrible risk they were running, and would almost certainly suffer for. Lord Dusamy knew all this, because he had helped to orchestrate it. After a moment of consultation among the scrutineers, the one who had called for acclamation now said, "We shall proceed by scrutiny." I got lost, I'm sorry. I blinked for a second and was like, where am I? There was excited talk among the cardinals as the ballots were prepared and handed out. This had never happened before in the lifetime of most of these princes of the church. Immediately, the acclamation hollows of the missing cardinal electors had become irrelevant. Although a few of the absent cardinals had prepared their interactive chips for scrutiny, most had not bothered. The masters of ceremonies moved among the stalls, distributing voting cards, 3 to each cardinal elector. The scrutineers moved among the forest of stalls to make sure that each of the cardinals had a pen. When all was in readiness, the cardinal deacon among the scrutineers raised his hand again, this time to signify the moment of voting. Lord Dusamy looked at his ballot. On the upper left, the words "Eligo in summum pontificem." I'm going to use the classical Latin hard C for most of these. Appeared in print. "Eligo in summum pontificem," as opposed to the Italian C-H, softer C. That is technically not correct that I should do that, but I'm doing it because I'm asserting myself. That's why. Anyway, Lord Dusamy looked at his ballot. On the upper left, the words Eligo in Summum Pontificum appeared in print. There was room for one name beneath it. Simone Augustino Cardinal Lord Dusamy wrote in Lenar Hoyt, and folded the card and held it up so that it could be seen. Within a minute, all 83 of the cardinals were holding a card aloft, as were half a dozen of the interactive hollows. The scrutineer began calling the cardinals forward in order of precedence. Cardinal Lord Dusamy went first, leaving his stall and walking to the scrutineer's table next to the altar beneath the gaze of the terrible Christ of the fresco. Genuflecting and then kneeling at the altar, Lord Dusamy bowed his head in silent prayer. Rising, he said aloud, "I call to witness Christ the Lord, who will be my judge, that my vote is given to the one who before God I consider should be elected." Lord Dusamy solemnly set his folded card on the silver plate that sat atop the vote receptacle. Lifting the plate, he dropped his vote into the receptacle. The cardinal deacon among the scrutineers nodded. Lord Dusamy bowed toward the altar and returned to his stall. Cardinal Mustafa, the Grand Inquisitor, moved majestically toward the altar to cast the second vote. It was more than an hour later that the votes were tallied. The first scrutineer shook the receptacle to mix the votes. The second scrutineer counted them, including the 6 votes copied from the interactive hollows, depositing each in a second receptacle. The count equaled the number of voting cardinals in the conclave. The scrutiny proceeded. The first scrutineer unfolded a card, wrote down the name on it, and passed the card to the second scrutineer, who made a note and passed it to the third and final scrutineer. This man, Cardinal it's this guy again. Cardinal Kuznongle. Friggin' Kuznongle again. Kunongle. I don't know how that's pronounced. I should look that up, but I don't think he's relevant after this chapter. That's not spoilers. There's a lot of names in here. This man, Cardinal Kunongle, as it turned out, said the name aloud before making a note of it. In each of the stalls, a cardinal jotted the name on a scriber pad provided by the scrutineers. At the end of the conclave, the scribers would be scrambled, their files deleted so that no record of the voting would remain. And so the voting proceeded. For Lord Dusamy, as for the rest of the living cardinals present, the only suspense was whether the dissident cardinal electors from the acclamation would actually put someone else's name into play. As each card was read, the last scrutineer ran a threaded needle through the word Eligo and slid the card down the thread. When all of the ballots had been read aloud, knots were tied in each end of the thread. The winning candidate was admitted to the chapel. Standing before the altar in a simple black cassock, the man looked humble and a bit overwhelmed. Standing before him, the senior deacon cardinal said, "Do you accept your canonical election as Supreme Pontiff?" "I do so accept it," said the priest. At this point, a stall was brought out and set behind the priest. The cardinal deacon raised his hands and intoned, "Thus accepting your canonical election, this gathering does, in the sight of God Almighty, acknowledge you as Bishop of the Church of Rome, true Pope, and head of the College of Bishops. May God advise you well as he grants you full and absolute power over the Church of Jesus Christ." "Amen," said Cardinal Lord Dusamy, and pulled the cord that lowered the canopy over his stall. All 83 physical canopies and 37 holographic ones lowered at the same time, until only the new popes remained raised. The priest, now pontiff, sat back in the seat beneath the papal canopy. "What name do you choose as Supreme Pontiff?" asked the deacon cardinal. "I choose the name Urban the 16th, said the seated priest. There was a murmuring and hum from the cardinal's stalls. The cardinal deacon held out his hand, and he and the other scrutineers led the priest from the chapel. The murmuring and whispering rose in volume. Cardinal Mustafa leaned out of his stall and said to Lord Dusamy, "He must be thinking of Urban II. Urban XV was a sniveling little coward in the 29th century who did little but read detective novels and write love letters to his former mistress." "Urban II," mused Lord Dusamy. "Yes, of course." After several minutes, the scrutineers returned with the priest, now the Pope, dressed in pure white, a white caped cassock, a white zucchetto or skull cap, a pectoral cross, and a white fascia sash. Cardinal Lord Dusamy went to his knees on the stone floor of the chapel, as did all the other cardinals, real and holographic, as the new pontiff gave his first benediction. Then the scrutineers and the attending cardinals went to the stove to burn the votes now tethered on a black thread, adding enough bianco chemical to make sure that the sfumata would indeed be white smoke. The cardinals filed out of the Sistine Chapel and walked the ancient paths and corridors to St. Peter's, where the senior cardinal deacon went alone onto the balcony to announce the name of the new pontiff to the waiting multitudes. Among the 500,000 waiting individuals in the multitude squeezed... Oh, okay. Among the 500,000 waiting individuals in the multitude squeezed into, out of, and around St. Peter's Square that morning was Father Captain Federico de Soya. He had been released from his de facto imprisonment at the Legionaries' Rectory only hours before. He was to report to Pax Fleet Spaceport later that afternoon for shuttle to his new command. Walking through the Vatican, de Soya had followed the crowds, then had been engulfed by them, as men, women, and children had flowed like a great river toward the square. A great cheer had gone up when the puffs of white smoke first became visible from the stovepipe. The impossibly thick throng beneath the balcony of St. Peter's somehow became thicker as tens of thousands more guard troopers held the crowd back from the entrance to the basilica and away from the private areas. When the senior deacon emerged and announced that the new pope was to be called His Holiness Urban XVI, a great gasp went up from the crowd. De Soya found himself gaping in surprise and shock. Everyone had expected Julius XV. The thought of anyone else as pope was, well, unthinkable. Then the new pontiff stepped onto the balcony, and the gasps turned to cheers that went on and on and on. I just banged my mic with my hand. I am so sorry. "Be banished to the Netherlands." Sorry, not the Netherlands. I wouldn't inflict these Russian Twitch bots on anyone, least of all Netherlanders. It's been a minute since I've been to the Netherlands. I should really go back. I'm meaning to do a Europe trip for a while now, but time and energy. Where were we? Yes, the cheers that went on and on and on. It was Pope Julius, the familiar face, the high forehead, the sad eyes. Father Lenar Hoyt, the savior of the church, had once again been elected. His Holiness raised his hand in the familiar benediction and waited for the crowd to stop cheering so that he could speak, but the crowd would not stop cheering. The roar rose from 500,000 throats and went on and on. Why Urban the 16th? Wondered Father Captain de Soya. He had read and studied enough history of the church in his years as a Jesuit. Quickly he thumbed back through his mental notes on the urban popes. Most were forgettable, or worse. Why? Damn, Father Captain de Soya said aloud, the soft curse lost under the continuing roar of the faithful filling St. Peter's Square. Damn, he said again. Even before the crowd quieted enough for the new old pontiff to speak, to explain his choice of name, to announce what de Soya knew had to be announced, the Father Captain understood. and his heart sank with that understanding. Urban II had served from AD 1088 to 1099. At the Synod, the Pope had called in Clermont in November, in the year 1095, Desoya thought. Urban II had made his call for holy war against the Muslims in the Near East, for the rescue of Byzantium, and for the liberation of all Eastern Christian holy places from Muslim domination. That call had led to the First Crusade, the first of many bloody campaigns. The crowd finally quieted. Pope Urban XVI began to speak, the familiar but newly energized voice rising and falling over the heads of the 500,000 faithful listening in person and the billions listening via live broadcast. Father Captain Desoya turned away even before the new pope began to speak. He pushed and elbowed his way back through the unmoving crowd, trying to escape the suddenly claustrophobic confines of St. Peter's Square. It was no use. The crowd was rapt and joyous, and Desoya was trapped in the mob. The words from the new pontiff were also joyous and impassioned. The Father Captain Desoya stood, unable to escape, and bowed his head. As the crowd began cheering and crying, "Deus Revolt! God wills it," Desoya began to weep. Crusade. Glory. A final resolution to the ouster problem. Death beyond imagining. Destruction beyond imagining. Father Captain Desoya squeezed his eyes shut as tightly as he could, but the vision of charged particle beams flaring against the blackness of space, of entire worlds burning, of oceans turning to steam and continents into molten rivers of lava, visions of orbital forests exploding into smoke, of charred bodies tumbling in zero-G, of fragile, winged creatures flaring and charring and expanding into ash. Desoya wept, while billions cheered. Four. It has been my experience that late-night departures and farewells are the hardest on the spirit. The military was especially good at beginning major voyages in the middle of the night. During my time in the Hyperion Home Guard, it seemed that all important troop movements began in the wee hours. I began to associate that odd blend of fear and excitement, dread and anticipation, with pre-dawn darkness and the smell of lateness. Aenea had said that I would be leaving that night of her announcement to the Fellowship, but it took time to load the kayak, for me to pack my gear and decide what to leave behind forever, and to close up my tent and work area in the compound, so we weren't airborne in the dropship until after 2 a.m., and it was almost sunrise before we reached our destination. I admit that I felt rushed and ordered about by the girl's preemptive announcement. Many people had come to look to Aenea for leadership and advice during the 4 years we spent at Taliesin West, but I wasn't one of those people. I was 32 years old. Aenea was 16. It was my job to watch out for her, to protect her, and, if it came to that, to tell her what to do and when to do it. I didn't like this turn of events one bit. I'd assumed that Bettik would be flying with us to wherever I was supposed to shove off, but Aenea said that the android would be staying behind at the compound, so I wasted another 20 minutes tracking him down and saying goodbye. Aenea says that we will meet up again in due course, said the blue man, so I am confident that we shall, Endymion. Raul, I said for the 500th time. Call me Raul. Of course, said Bettik with that slight smile that suggested insubordination. Fuck it, I said eloquently, and stuck out my hand. Bettik shook it. I had the urge then to hug our old traveling companion, but I knew that it would embarrass him. Androids were not literally programmed to be stiff and subservient. They were, after all, living, organic beings, not machines. But between RNA training and long practice, they were hopelessly formal creatures. At least this one was. And then we were away, Aenea and I, taxiing the dropship out of its hangar into the desert night and lifting off with as little noise as possible. I had said goodbye to as many of the other Fellowship apprentices and workers as I had found, but the hour was late, and the people were scattered to their dorm cubbies, tents, and apprentice shelters. I hoped that I would run into some of them again, especially some of the construction crewmen and women with whom I'd worked for 4 years, but I had little real belief that I would. The dropship could have flown itself to our destination, just a series of coordinates Aenea had given it, but I left the controls on semi-manual so I could pretend I had something to do during the flight. I knew from the coordinates that we would be traveling about 1,500 clicks. Somewhere along the Mississippi River, Aenea had said. The dropship could have done that distance in 10 suborbital minutes, but we had been conserving its dwindling energy and fuel reserves, so once we had extended the wings to maximum, we kept our velocity subsonic, our altitude set at a comfortable 10,000 meters, and avoided morphing the ship again until landing. We ordered the console's starship persona, which I'd long ago loaded from my comlog into the dropship's AI core, to keep quiet unless it had something important to tell us, and then we settled back in the red instrument glow to talk and watch the dark continent pass beneath us. "Kiddo," I said, "why this galloping hurry?" Aenea made the self-conscious, throwing-away gesture I had first seen her use almost 5 years earlier.
It seemed important to get things going.
Her voice was soft, almost lifeless, drained of the vitality and energy that had moved the entire Fellowship to her will.
It seemed important to get things going.
That's better. Perhaps I was the only living person who could identify the tone, but she sounded close to tears. "It can't be that important," I said, "to make me leave in the middle of the night." Aenea shook her head and looked out the dark windscreen for a moment. I realized she was crying. When she finally turned back, the glow from the instruments made her eyes look very moist and red.
"If you don't leave tonight, I'll lose my nerve and ask you not to go. If you don't go, I'll lose my nerve again and stay on Earth. Never go back."
I had the urge to take her hand then, but I kept my big paw on the Omni-controller instead. "Hey," I said, "we can go back together. This doesn't make any sense for me to go off one way and you another."
"Yes, it does,"
said Aenea so quiet.
"Yes, it does,"
said Aenea so quietly that I had to lean to my right to hear her. "Bettik could go fetch the ship," I said. "You and I can stay on Earth until we're ready to return." Aenea shook her head.
"I'll never be ready to go back, Raul. The thought scares me to death."
I thought of the wild chase that had sent us fleeing through Pax space from Hyperion, barely eluding Pax starships, torch ships, fighter aircraft, Marines, Swiss Guard, and God knows what else, including that bitch thing from hell that had almost killed us on God's Grove. And I said, "I feel the same way, kiddo. Maybe we should stay on Earth. They can't reach us here." Aenea looked at me, and I recognized the expression. It was not mere stubbornness. It was a closing of all discussion on a matter that was settled. "All right," I said, "but I still haven't heard why Bettik couldn't take this kayak and go get the ship while I farcast back with you."
"Yes, you have," said Aenea. "You weren't listening."
She shifted sideways in the big seat.
"Raul, if you leave and we agree to meet at a certain time in a certain place in Pax space, I have to go through the Farcaster and do what I have to do. And what I have to do next, I have to do on my own."
"Aenea," I said.
"Yes?"
"That's really stupid. Do you know that?" The 16-year-old said nothing. Below and to the left, somewhere in western Kansas, a circle of campfires became visible. I looked out at the lights amid all that darkness. "Any idea what experiment your alien friends are doing down there?" I said.
"No," said Aenea, "and they aren't my alien friends."
"Which aren't they?" I said. "Aliens or friends?"
"Neither,"
said Aenea. I realized that this was the most specific she had ever been about the godlike intelligences that had kidnapped old Earth, and us, it seemed to me at times, as if we had been harried and driven through the Farcasters like cattle. "Care to tell me anything else about these non-alien non-friends?" I said. "After all, something could go wrong. I might not make it to our rendezvous. I'd like to know the secret of our hosts before I go." I regretted saying that as soon as the words were out. Aenea pulled back as if I had slapped her. "Sorry, kiddo," I said. This time I did put my hand on hers. "I didn't mean that. I'm just angry." Aenea nodded, and I could see the tears in her eyes again. Still mentally kicking myself, I said, "Everyone in the Fellowship was sure that the aliens were benevolent, godlike creatures. People said lions and tigers and bears, but what they were thinking was Jesus and Yahweh and E.T. from that old flat film that Mr. W. showed us. Everyone was sure that when it came time to fold up the big fellowship... Everyone was sure that when it came time to fold up the Fellowship, the aliens would appear and lead us back to the packs in a big mothership. No danger, no muss, no fuss." Aenea smiled, but her eyes still glistened. "Humans have been waiting for Jesus and Yahweh and E.T. to save their asses since before they covered those asses with bearskins and came out of their cave," she said. "They'll have to keep waiting. This is our business, our fight, and we have to take care of it ourselves." "Ourselves being you and me and A. Bettik against 800 billion or so of the born-again faithful?" I said softly. Aenea made the graceful gesture with her hand again. "Yeah," she said. "For now." Optical antenna says, "Think he's referring to Monday, Wednesday, Friday, same book." Yes. Yes, I assume that's what he's referring to. Damn privacy evasion by Google. Is YouTube showing ads for some reason? I would hope they aren't, but I wouldn't be surprised if they were. I rarely see ads from YouTube on my end, but that's mostly because I have about a zillion different ad block methodologies I've got pumping in, which have to be updated in order to keep up. Otherwise, all I'd see is advertisements. God, I remember back before ad block technology. Jeez Louise. Those were the bad old days. Some of those days were the bad old days. When we arrived, it was not only still dark, but raining hard. A cold, sleety end-of-autumn rain. The Mississippi was a big river, one of old Earth's largest, and the dropship circled over it once before landing in a small town on the west bank. I saw all this on the view screen under image enhancement. The view out the actual windscreen was blackness and rain. We came in over a high hill covered with bare trees, crossed an empty highway that spanned the Mississippi on a narrow bridge, and landed in an open, paved area about 50 meters from the river. The town ran back from the river here in a valley between wooded hills, and on the view screen I could make out small wooden buildings, larger brick warehouses, and a few taller structures near the river that might have been grain silos. Those kinds of structures had been common in the 19th, 20th, and 21st centuries in this part of old Earth. I had no idea why this city had been spared the earthquakes and fires of the tribulations, or why the lions and tigers and bears had rebuilt it, if they had. There had been no sign of people in the narrow streets, nor of heat signatures on the infrared bands. Neither living creatures nor ground cars with their overheated internal combustion drive systems. But then again, it was almost 4:30 in the morning on a cold, rainy night. No one with an ounce of sense would be out in that lousy, stinking weather. We both pulled on ponchos. I hefted my small backpack and said, "So long, ship. Don't do anything I wouldn't do." And we were down the morphed stairs and into the rain. Aenea helped me tug the kayak out of the storage area in the belly of the dropship, and we headed down the slick street toward the river. On our previous river adventure, I had carried night vision goggles, an assortment of weapons, and a raft full of fancy gadgets. This night, I had the flashlight laser that was our only memento of the trip out to Earth. Set to its weakest, most energy-conserving setting, it illuminated about 2 meters of rain-slick street, a Navajo hunting knife in my backpack, and some sandwiches and dried fruit packed away. I was ready to take on the packs. Link is to a new lawsuit. Is that coming through the chat? Because I did not see that pop up. I get Twitch bots that pop in, and I can see those pop up with their text. But if it's via YouTube, I did not see that one. But if it's just like another Google sucking up your data and then doing its usual, if there's somebody doing an actual lawsuit against them, I'm all for it. Anything that at least attempts to put a check on them is a good start. Again, if somebody knows of another platform similar to YouTube that isn't owned by Google, please keep me in the know. Do tell me, because I will switch in a heartbeat. Where are we? Yes, I was ready to take on the packs. What is this place? I said.
Hannibal, said Aenea, struggling to hold the slick kayak as we stumbled down the street. By this point, I had to shift the slim flashlight laser in my teeth, keeping both hands on the bow of the stupid little boat. When we reached the point where the street became a loading ramp running into the black torrent of the Mississippi, I set the kayak down, removed the flashlight, and said, St. Petersburg. I had spent hundreds of hours reading in the Fellowship compound's rich library of print books. I saw Aenea's hooded figure nod in the reflected glow of the flashlight beam. This is crazy, I said, swinging the flashlight beam around the empty street, against the wall of the brick warehouses, out to the dark river. The rush of dark water was frightening. Any thought of setting off on that was insane. Selling assistant mistriggered voice recordings to third parties. No kidding. No kidding. That probably includes me. Send me a link to that, either via the Discord or through the chat, if you have a chance. I'd be interested in reading up on that. That seems directly relevant to me. I mean, I kind of always assumed. I think I've made note of how I've assumed that they're basically using me to build their voice stuff. Me among, literally everyone else who uses the platform. You don't really have much of a choice because of the TOU and licensing agreement. Well, not licensing agreement, but the terms of service, rather. TOS, not TOU. Also TOU, probably. Ay. This is crazy, I said, swinging the flashlight beam around the empty street against the wall of brick warehouses out to the dark river. The rush of dark water was frightening. Any thought of setting off on that was insane. Yes, said Aenea, crazy. The cold rain beat on the hood of her poncho. I went around the kayak and took her by the arm. You see the future, I said. When are we going to see each other again? Her head was bowed. I could make out only the barest gleam of her pale cheek in the reflected beam. The arm I gripped through the sleeve of the poncho might as well have been the branch of a dead tree for all the life I felt there. She said something too softly for me to make it out over the sound of the rain and the river. What? I said. I said I don't see the future, she said. I remember parts of it. What's the difference? Aenea sighed and stepped closer. It was cold enough that our breaths actually mingled in the air. I felt the adrenaline rush from anxiety, fear, and anticipation. The difference is, she said, that seeing is a form of clarity. Remembering is something else. I shook my head. Rain dripped in my eyes. I don't understand. Raul, do you remember Bet's Kimball's birthday party? When Jave played the piano and Kiki got falling down drunk? Yeah, I said, irritated at this discussion in the middle of the night, in the middle of the storm, in the middle of our departure. When was it? What? When was it? She repeated.
Behind us, the Mississippi flowed out of the darkness and back into darkness. Oh, yes, no, flowed out of the darkness and back into darkness with the speed of a maglev train. April, I said. Early May. I don't know. The hooded figure before me nodded.
And what did Mr. Wright wear that night?
I had never had the impulse to hit or spank or scream at Aenea, not until this moment. This minute. How should I know? Why should I remember that?
Try to.
I let out my breath and looked away at the dark hills in the black night. Shit, I don't know. His gray wool suit. Yeah, I remember him standing by the piano in it. That gray suit with the big buttons. Aenea nodded again.
Betsy's birthday was in mid-March, she said over the pattern of rain on our hoods. Mr. Wright didn't come because he had a cold.
So? I said, knowing very well what point she had just made.
So I remember bits of the future, she said, her voice sounding close to tears. I'm afraid to trust those memories. If I say when we will see each other again, it may be like Mr. Wright's gray suit.
For a long minute I said nothing. Rain pounded like tiny fists on closed coffins. That's some great imagery. Finally, I said, yeah. Aenea took 2 steps and put her arms around me. Our ponchos crinkled against each other. I could feel the tightness of her back and the new softness of her chest as we hugged clumsily. She stepped back.
Can I have the flashlight for a moment?
I handed it to her. She pulled back the nylon apron in the tiny cockpit of the kayak and shined the light on the narrow strip of polished wood there beneath the fiberglass. A single red button under its clear protective panel gleamed in the rain.
See that?
Yeah?
Don't touch it, whatever you do.
I admit that I barked a laugh at that. Among the things I had read in the Taliesin library were plays of the absurd, like Waiting for Godot. I had the feeling that we had flown into some latitude of the absurd and surreal here.
I'm serious,
said Aenea. Why put a button in if it's not to be touched? I said, wiping the dripping moisture out of my face. The hooded figure shook its head.
I mean, don't touch it until you absolutely have to.
How will I know when I absolutely have to, kiddo?
You'll know,
she said, and gave me another hug.
We'd better get this into the river.
I bent to kiss her forehead then. I had done this dozens of times over the past few years, wishing her well before one of her retreats, tucking her in, kissing her clammy forehead when she was sick with fever or half dead from fatigue. But as I bent to kiss her, Aenea raised her face, and for the first time since we had met in the midst of the dust and confusion in the Valley of the Time Tombs, I kissed her on the lips. I believe that I have mentioned before how Aenea's gaze is more powerful and intimate than most people's physical touches, how her touch is like a jolt of electricity. This kiss was beyond all that. I was 32 years old that night in Hannibal, on the west bank of the river known as the Mississippi, on the world once known as Earth, lost now somewhere in the lesser Magellanic Cloud, in the dark and rain, and I had never experienced a jolt of sensation like that first kiss. I pulled back in shock. The flashlight laser had tilted up between us, and I could see the glint of her dark eyes, looking mischievous, perhaps. Relieved, perhaps, as if a long wait had ended, and something else.
Goodbye, Raul,
she said, and lifted her end of the kayak. My mind reeling, I placed the bow in the dark water at the bottom of the ramp and leveraged myself down and into the cockpit. Bettik had fashioned it for me like a well-tailored suit of clothes. I made sure not to depress the red button in my flailing around. Aenea shoved, and the kayak was floating in 20 centimeters of water. She handed me the double-bladed paddle, then my backpack, and then the flashlight laser. I aimed the beam at the dark water between us. "Where's the Farcaster portal?" I said. I heard the words from a distance, as if some third party had spoken. My mind and emotions were still dealing with the kiss. I was 32 years old. This child had just turned 16. My job was to protect her and to keep her alive until we could return to Hyperion and the old poet someday. This was madness.
"You'll see it," she said, "sometime after daylight."
Hours away, then. This was theater of the absurd. "And what do I do after I find the ship?" I said. "Where do we meet?"
"There's a world named Tian Shan," said Aenea. "It means mountains of heaven. The ship will know how to find it."
"It's in the packs?" I said.
"Just barely," she said, her breath hanging in the cold air. "It was in the hegemony outback. The Pax has incorporated it into the Protectorate and promised to send missionaries, but it hasn't been tamed yet."
"Tian Shan," I repeated. "All right. How do I find you? Planets are big things." I could see her dark eyes in the bouncing flashlight beam. They were moist with rain or tears, or both.
"Find a mountain called Hang Shan, the sacred mountain of the north. Near it there will be a place called Xuan Kung Su," she said. "It means temple hanging in air. I should be there."
I made a rude gesture with my fist. "Great, so all I have to do is stop at the local Pax garrison and ask directions to the temple hanging in air, and you'll be hanging there waiting for me."
"There are only a few thousand mountains on Tian Shan," she said, her voice flat and unhappy. "There are only a few thousand mountains on Tian Shan," she said, her voice flat and unhappy, "and only a few cities. The ship can find Hangshan and Xuan Kung Su from orbit. You won't be able to land there, but you'll be able to disembark."
"Why won't I be able to land there?" I said, irritated by all of these puzzles within enigmas within codes.
"You'll see, Raul," she said, her voice as filled with tears as her eyes had been. "Please go."
The current was trying to carry me away, but I paddled the buoyant little kayak back into place. Aenea walked along the river's edge to keep pace with me. The sky seemed to be lightening up a bit in the east.
"Are you certain we'll see each other there?" I shouted through the thinning rain. "I'm not certain of anything, Raul." "Not even that we'll survive this?"
I'm not sure what I meant by this. I'm not even sure what I meant when I said survive.
"Especially not of that," said the girl, and I saw the old smile, full of mischief and anticipation, and something like sadness mixed with involuntary wisdom.
The current was pulling me away.
"How long will it take me to get to the ship?" "I think only a few days," she called.
We were several meters apart now, and the current was pulling me out into the Mississippi.
"And when I find the ship, how long to get to Tian Shan?"
I called. Aenea shouted back the answer, but it was lost in the lapping of waves against the hull of my little kayak.
"What?" I yelled. "I couldn't hear you." "I love you,"
called Aenea, and her voice was clear and bright across the dark water. The river pulled me out into it. I could not speak. My arms did not work when I thought to paddle against the powerful current.
"Aenea?"
I aimed the flashlight toward the shore, caught a glimpse of her poncho gleaming in the light, the pale oval of her face in the shadow of the hood.
"Aenea!"
She shouted something, waved. I waved back. The current was very strong for a moment. I paddled violently to avoid being pulled into an entire tree that had snagged on a sandbar, and then I was out in the central current and hurtling south. I looked back, but walls of the last buildings in Hannibal hid my dear girl from view. A minute later I heard a hum like the dropship's EM repulsors, but when I looked up, I saw only shadow. It could have been her circling. It could have been a low cloud in the night. The river pulled me south.
"5.
Father Captain DeSoya deadheaded from Pachem system on the HHS Ragwell. Raguel? Not actually. Let's go with Ragwell.
Raguel. Raguel.
I've heard it pronounced Ragwell. but given that it's an angel, you probably emphasize the L. So Raguel? Anyway, 5. Father Captain DeSoya deadheaded from Pachem system on the HHS Raguel, an Archangel-class cruiser similar to the ship he had been ordered to command. Killed by the terrible vortex of the classified instantaneous drive, known to Pax's fleet now as the Gideon Drive, DeSoya was resurrected in 2 days rather than the usual 3, the resurrection chaplains taking the added risk of unsuccessful resurrection because of the urgency of the Father Captain's orders, and found himself at the Omicron 2 Epsilon 3 Pax Fleet Strategic Positioning Station orbiting a lifeless, rocky world, spinning in the darkness beyond Epsilon Eridani, in the old neighborhood, only a handful of light years from where old Earth had once existed. The 2 and 3 in Omicron 2 and Epsilon 3 are supertext like you get for the square or cube root. But I'm going to pronounce them as the numbers for lack of knowledge of how to actually say that aloud. DeSoya was given 1 day to recover his faculties and then was shuttled to the Omicron 2 Epsilon 3 fleet staging area, 100,000 clicks out from the military base. The midshipman pointing the Wasp shuttle went out of his way to give Father Captain DeSoya a good look at his new command, and, despite himself, DeSoya was thrilled with what he saw. The HHS Raphael was obviously state-of-the-art technology, no longer derivative, as all of the previous Pax ships DeSoya had been... Okay. That threw me for some reason. The HHS Raphael was obviously state-of-the-art technology, no longer derivative, as all of the previous Pax ship DeSoya had seen had been, of rediscovered hegemony designs from before the fall. The overall design seemed too lean for practical vacuum work and too complicated for atmosphere, but the overall effect was one of streamlined lethality. The hull was a composite of morphable alloys and areas of pure fixed energy, allowing rapid shape and function changes that would have been impossible a few years before. As the shuttle passed the Raphael in a long, slow ballistic arc, DeSoya watched the exterior of the long ship go from chrome silver to a stealth matte black, essentially disappearing from view. At the same time, several of the instrument booms and living cubbies were swallowed by the smooth central hull, until only weapons blisters and containment field probes remained. Either the ship was preparing for out-system translation checks, or the officers aboard knew very well that the passing Wasp carried their new commander, and they were showing off a bit. DeSoya knew that both assumptions were almost certainly true. Before the cruiser blacked into oblivion, DeSoya noticed how the fusion drive spheres had been clustered like pearls around the central ship's axis, rather than concentrated in a single swelling, such as on his old torch ship, the Balthazar. He also noticed how much smaller the hexagonal Gideon drive array was on this ship than on the prototype Raphael. His last glimpse before the ship became invisible was of the lights glowing from the retracted, translucent living cubbies and the clear dome of the command deck. DeSoya knew from his reading on Pachem and the RNA instructional injections he had received at Pax Fleet headquarters that these clear areas would morph thicker armored epidermises, but DeSoya had always enjoyed a view and would appreciate the window out into space. "Coming up on the Uriel, sir," said the midshipman pilot. DeSoya nodded. The HHS Uriel seemed a near clone of the new Raphael, but as the Wasp shuttle decelerated closer, the Father Captain could pick out the extra Omega knife generators, the added glowing conference cubbies, and the more elaborate comm antennae that made this vessel the flagship of the task force. "Docking warning, sir," said the midshipman. DeSoya nodded and took his seat on the number 2 acceleration couch. The mating was smooth enough that he felt no jolt whatsoever as the connection clamps closed, and the ship's skin and umbilicals morphed around the shuttle. DeSoya was tempted to praise the young midshipman, but old habits of command reasserted themselves. Next time, he said, try the final approach without the last-second flare. It's showing off, and the brass on a flagship frown on it. The young pilot's face fell. DeSoya set his hand on her shoulder. Other than that, good job. I'd have you aboard my ship as a dropship pilot any day. The crestfallen midshipman brightened. I could only wish, sir. This station duty. She stopped, realizing that she had gone too far. I know, said DeSoya, standing by the cycling lock. I know. But for now, be glad that you're not part of this crusade. The lock cycled open, and an honor guard whistled him aboard the HHS Uriel, the Archangel, if Father Captain DeSoya remembered correctly, that the Old Testament had described as the leader of the heavenly hosts of angels. 90 light-years away, in a star system only 3 light-years from Pachem, the original Raphael translated into real space with a violence that would have spat marrow from human bones, sliced through human cells like a hot blade through radiant gossamers, and scrambled human neurons like loose marbles on a steep hillside. Radamanth Nemes and her clone siblings did not enjoy the sensation, but neither did they cry out or grimace.
"Where is this place?"
said Nemes, watching a brown planet grow in the view screen. Raphael was decelerating under 230 gravities. Nemes did not sit in the acceleration couch, but she did hang on to a stanchion with the casual ease of a commuter on her way to work in a crowded ground bus. "Svoboda," said one of her 2 male siblings. Nemes nodded. None of the 4 spoke again until the Archangel was in orbit and the dropship detached and howling through the thin air.
"He'll be here?"
asked Nemes. Microfilaments ran from her temples directly into the dropship console.
"Oh, yes,"
said Nemes's twin sister. A few humans lived on Svoboda, but since the fall they had huddled in force field domes in the Twilight Zone and did not have the technology to track the Archangel or its dropship. There were no Pax bases in this system. Meanwhile, the sunward side of the rocky world boiled until lead ran like water, and on the dark side the thin atmosphere hovered on the edge of freezing. Beneath the useless planet, however, ran more than 800,000 kilometers of tunnels, each corridor a perfect 30 meters square. Svoboda was one of the 9 labyrinthine worlds discovered in the early days of the Hegira and explored during the hegemony. Hyperion had been another of the 9 worlds. No human, alive or dead, knew the secret of the labyrinths or their creators. Nemes piloted the dropship through a pelting ammonia storm on the dark side, hovered an instant before an ice cliff visible only on infrared and amplification screens, then folded the ship's wings in and guided it forward into the square opening of the labyrinth entrance. This tunnel turned once and then stretched straight on for kilometers. Deep radar showed a honeycomb of other passages beneath it. Nemes flew forward 3 clicks, turned left at the first junction of tunnels, dropped half a kilometer from the surface while traveling 5 clicks south, and then landed the ship. Here, the infrared showed only trace heat from lava vents, and the amplifiers showed nothing on the view screen. Frowning at the return on the radar displays, Nemes flipped on the dropship's exterior lights. For as far as she could see down the infinitely straight corridor, the walls of the tunnel had been carved into a row of horizontal stone slabs. On each slab was a naked human body. The slabs and bodies continued on and on into darkness. Nemes glanced at the deep radar display. The lower levels were also striated with slabs and bodies. "Outside," said the male sibling who had pulled Nemes from the lava on God's Grove. Nemes did not bother with the airlock. Atmosphere rushed out of the dropship with a dying roar. There was a hint of pressure in the cavern, enough that she would not have to phase shift to survive, but the air was thinner than Mars's had been before it was terraformed. Nemes's personal sensors indicated that the temperature was steady at minus 162 degrees centigrade. So just remember, it can always be chillier if you're getting hit by this current winter cycle in the U.S., which is covering, I don't know, half the half the continental U.S. at this point. A human figure was outside, waiting in the dropship's floodlights. "Good evening," said Counselor Albedo. The tall man was impeccably dressed in a gray suit tailored to Pacham tastes. He communicated directly on the 75 megahertz band. Albedo's mouth did not move, but his perfect teeth were visible in a smile. Nemes and her siblings waited. She knew that there would be no further reprimands or punishment. The 3 sectors wanted her alive and functioning. "The girl, Aenea, has returned to Pax Space," said Albedo.
Where?
Said Nemes's female sibling. There was something like eagerness between the flat tones of her voice. Counselor Albedo opened his hands.
The portal,
Began Nemes. "Tells us nothing this time," said Counselor Albedo. His smile had not wavered. Nemes frowned at this. During all the centuries of the hegemony's world web, the 3 sectors of consciousness of the core had not found a way to use the void portal, that instantaneous interface that humans had known as Farcasters, without leaving a record of modulated neutrinos in the fold matrix.
The something else,
she said. "Of course," said Albedo. He flicked his hand as if discarding the useless segment of this conversation. "But we can still register the connection. We feel sure that the girl is among those returning from old Earth via the old Farcaster network." "There are others?" said one of the males. Albedo nodded. "A few at first. More now. At least 50 activations at last count." Nemes folded her arms.
Do you think the something else is terminating the old Earth experiment?
"No," said Albedo. He walked over to the nearest slab and looked down at the naked human body on it. It had been a young woman, no more than 17 or 18 standard years old. She had red hair. White frost lay on her pale skin and open eyes. "No," he said again. "The sectors agree that it is just Aenea's group returning."
How do we find her?
Said Nemes's female sibling, obviously musing aloud on the 75 megahertz band.
We can translate to every world that had a Farcaster during the hegemony and interrogate the Farcaster portals in person.
Albedo nodded. "The something else can conceal the Farcast destinations," he said, "but the core is almost certain that it cannot hide the fact of the Matrix fold itself."
Almost certain.
Nemes noted that unusual modifier of technocore perceptions. "We want you," began Albedo, pointing at the female sibling. "The stable sector did not give you a name, did it?"
No,
said Nemes's twin. Limp, dark bangs fell over the pale forehead. No smile touched the thin lips. Albedo chuckled on the 75 megahertz band. "Radamanth Nemes needed a name to pass as a human crewmate on the Raphael. I think that the rest of you should be named, if just for my convenience." He pointed at the female. "Scylla." Stabbing his finger at each of the males in turn, he said, "Gyges, Briareus." None of the 3 responded to their christenings, but Nemes folded her arms and said,
Does this amuse you, Counselor?
"Yes," said Albedo. Around them, the atmosphere vented from the dropship. Curled and broiled like a wicked fog. The male, now named Briareus, said, "We'll keep this Archangel for transport and begin searching all the old web worlds, beginning, I assume, with the River Tethys planets." "Yes," said Albedo. Scylla tapped her nails on the frozen fabric of her jumpsuit.
4 ships. The search would go 4 times as fast.
"Obviously," said Albedo. "There are several reasons we have decided against that. The first being that the Pax has few of these Archangel ships free to loan." Nemes raised an eyebrow.
And when has the Corps asked the Pax for loans?
Since we need their money and their factories and their human resources to build the ships, said Albedo without emphasis. The second and final reason is that we want the four of you together in case you encounter someone or something impossible for one of you to handle. Nemes's eyebrows stayed up. She expected some reference to her failure on God's Grove, but it was Gyges who spoke.
What in the packs could we not handle, Counselor? Again the man in gray opened his hands. Behind him, the curling vapors of fog first obscured and then revealed the pale bodies on slabs. "The Shrike," he said. Nemes made a rude noise on the 75 megahertz band.
"I beat the thing single-handedly," she said.
Albedo shook his head. The maddening smile stayed fixed. "No," he said, "you did not. You used the hyperentropic device with which we supplied you to send it 5 minutes into the future. That is not the same thing as beating it." Briarius said, "The Shrike is no longer under the control of the UI?" Albedo opened his hands a final time. "The gods of the future are no longer whispered to us, my expensive friend. They war among themselves, and the clamor of their battle echoes back through time. If our God's work is to be done in our time, we must do it ourselves." He looked at the 4 clone siblings. "Are we clear on instructions?"
Find the girl, said Scylla.
"And?" "Kill her at once." said the counselor. "Kill her at once," said Gyges. "No hesitation." "And if her disciples intervene?" said Albedo, smiling more broadly now, his voice the caricature of a human schoolteacher's. "Kill them," said Briarius. "And if the Shrike appears?" he said, the smile suddenly fading.
"Destroy it,"
said Nemes. Albedo nodded. "Any final questions before we go our separate ways?" Scylla said,
"How many humans are here?"
She gestured toward the slabs and bodies. Counselor Albedo touched his chin. "A few tens of millions on this labyrinthine world in this section of tunnels. But there are many more tunnels here." He smiled again. "And 8 more labyrinth worlds." Nemes slowly turned her head, viewing the swirling fog and receding line of stone slabs on various levels of the spectrum. None of the bodies showed any sign of heat above the ambient temperature of the tunnel.
"And this is the Pax's work," she said.
Albedo chuckled on the 75 megahertz band. "Of course," he said. "Why would the 3 sectors of consciousness or our future UI want to stockpile human bodies?" He walked over to the body of the young woman and tapped her frozen breast. The air in the cavern was far too thin to carry the sound, but Nemes imagined... The air in the cavern was far too thin to carry sound, but Nemes imagined the noise of cold marble being tapped by fingernails. "Any more questions?" said Albedo. "I have an important meeting." Without a word on the 75 megahertz band, or any other band, the 4 siblings turned and re-entered the dropship. Gathered on the circular tactical conference center blister of the HHS Uriel were 20 Pax Fleet officers, including all of the captains and executive officers of Task Force Gideon. Among those executive officers was Commander Hogan Hogue Liebler, 36 standard years old, born again since his baptism on Renaissance Minor, the scion of the once great Liebler freehold family whose estate covered some 2 million hectares, and whose current debt ran to almost 5 marks per hectare. Liebler had dedicated his private life to serving the church and given his professional life to Pax Fleet. He was also a spy and a potential assassin. Liebler had looked up with interest at his new commanding officer. Oh, sorry. Liebler had looked up with interest as his new commanding officer was piped aboard the Uriel. Everyone in the task force, almost everyone in Pax's fleet, had heard of Father Captain de Soya. The former torchship CO had been granted a papal diski, meaning almost unlimited authority, for some secret project 5 standard years earlier, and then had failed at his mission. No one was sure what that mission had been, but de Soya's use of that diski had made enemies among fleet officers across the Pax. The Father Captain's subsequent failure and disappearance had been cause for more rumor in the wardrooms and fleet staff rooms. The most accepted theory was that de Soya had been turned over to the Holy Office, had been quietly excommunicated, and probably executed. But now, here he was, given command of one of the most treasured assets in Pax Fleet's arsenal, one of the 21 operational Archangel cruisers. Liebler was surprised at de Soya's appearance. The Father Captain was short, dark-haired, with large, sad eyes more appropriate to the icon of a martyred saint than to the skipper of a battlecruiser. Introductions were made quickly by Admiral Aldecacti, the stocky Lucian in charge of both this meeting and the task force.
Father Captain de Soya,
said Aldecacti, as de Soya took his place at the grey circular table within the grey circular room.
I believe you know some of these officers.
The Admiral was famous for her... Oh, that's a woman.
I believe you know some of these officers.
The Admiral was famous for her lack of tact as well as for her ferocity in battle. Mother Captain Stone is an old friend, said de Soya, nodding toward his former executive officer. Captain Hearn was a member of my last task force, and I have met Captain Sati and Captain Lempriere. I have also had the privilege of working with Commanders Uchikawa and Barnes-Aven. Admiral Aldecacti grunted.
Commander Barnes-Aven is here, representing the Marine and Swiss Guard presence on Task Force Gideon, she said.
I'm getting my accents confused.
Have you met your exec, Father Captain de Soya? Have you met your exec, Father Captain de Soya?
The priest captain shook his head, and Aldecacti introduced Liebler. The commander was surprised at the firmness in the diminutive Father Captain's grip, and the authority in the other man's gaze. As of a martyr, no, thought Lehog Liebler. This man is used to command.
All right, growled Admiral Aldecacti. Let's get started. Captain Sati will present the briefing. Captain Sati will present the briefing.
I don't know how often I'm going to have to use her voice. I'm going to have to figure that one out. For the next 20 minutes, the conference blister was fogged with holos and trajectory outlays. For the next 20 minutes, the conference blister was fogged with holos and trajectory overlays. Comlogs and scribers filled with data and scribbled notes. Sati's soft voice was the only sound except for the rare question or request for clarification. Liebler jotted his own notes, surprised at the scope of Task Force Gideon's mission, and busy at the work of any executive officer, getting down all the salient facts and details that the captain might want to review later. Gideon was the first task force made up completely of Archangel-class cruisers. 7 of the Archangels had been tasked to this mission. Conventional Hawking-class torch-ships had been dispatched months earlier to rendezvous with them at their first sally points in the outback, some 20 light-years beyond the Great Wall defensive sphere, so as to participate in a mock battle, but after that first jump, the task force of 7 ships would be operating independently. A good metaphor would be General Sherman's march through Georgia in pre-Hedger and North American Civil War in the 19th century, said Captain Sati, sending half of the officers at the table tapping at their comlog diskies to bring up that arcane bit of military history. Previously, continued Sati, our battles with the ousters have been either in the Great Wall no man's land or on the fringes of either Pax or ouster space. There have been very few deep penetration raids into ouster territory. Sati paused in his briefing. Father Captain de Soya's Task Force Magi some 5 standard years ago was one of the deepest of those raids.
Any comments about it, Father Captain?
Said Admiral Aldecacti. De Soya hesitated a moment. We burned an orbital forest ring. he said at last. There was no resistance. Sati nodded as if satisfied. That's what we hope will be the case for this entire mission. Our intelligence suggests that the ousters have deployed the vast bulk of their defensive forces along the sphere of the Great Wall, leaving very little in the way of armed resistance through the heart of their colonized areas beyond the Pax. For almost 3 centuries they have positioned their forces, their bases, and their home systems, with the limitations of Hawking drive technology as the primary determining factor. Tactical hollows filled the conference blister. The grand cliché, continued Sati, is that the Pax has had the advantage of interior lines of transport and communication, while the ousters have had the defensive strength of concealment and distance. Penetration deep into ouster space has been all but impossible due to the vulnerability of our supply lines and their willingness to cut and run before our superior strength, attacking later, often with devastating effect, when our task forces ventured too far from the Great Wall. Sati paused and looked at the officers around the table. Gentlemen and ladies, those days are over. More hollows misted into solidity, the red line of Task Force Gideon's trajectory out from and back to the Pax sphere, slicing between suns like a laser knife. Our mission is to destroy every in-system ouster supply base and deep space colony we encounter, said Sati, his soft voice taking on strength. Comet farms, can cities, boondoggles, Taurus bases, L-point clusters, orbital forest rings, birthing asteroids, bubble hives. Everything. Including civilian angels? Asked Father Captain DeSoya. Hogue Liebler blinked at his CO's question. Pax Fleet informally referred to the space-tailored DNA-altered mutants as Lucifer's Angels, usually shortened to Angels in an irony bordering on blasphemy, but the phrase was rarely used before the high brass. Admiral Aldecalde answered, "Especially angels, Father Captain. His Holiness Pope Urban has declared this a crusade against the inhuman travesties the ousters are breeding out there in the darkness. His Holiness has stated in his crusade encyclical that these unholy mutations are to be eliminated from God's universe. There are no civilian ousters. Do you have a problem understanding this directive, Father Captain DeSoya?" Officers around the table seemed to hold their breaths until DeSoya finally answered, "No, Admiral Aldecalde. I understand His Holiness's encyclical." The briefing continued. These Archangel-class cruisers will be involved, said Sati. His Holiness's ship Uriel as flagship, the Raphael, the Michael, the Gabriel, the Raguel, the Remiel, and the Sariel. In each case, the ships will use their Gideon drives to make the instantaneous jump to the next system, and will take 2 days or more to decelerate in system, thus allowing time for crew resurrection. His Holiness has granted us dispensation to use the new 2-day resurrection cycle creches, which offer a 92% probability of resurrection. After regrouping the attack force, we will do maximum damage to all ouster forces and installations before translating to the next system. Any Pax ship damaged beyond repair will be abandoned, the crew transferred to other ships in the task force, and the cruiser destroyed. No chances will be taken with the ousters, capturing Gideon drive technology, even though it will... Oh, there's no comma there. No chances will be taken with the ousters capturing Gideon drive technology, even though it would be useless to them without the sacrament of resurrection. The mission should extend some 3 standard months. Any questions? Father Captain DeSoya raised his hand. "I have to apologize," he said. "I've been out of touch for several standard years, but I noticed that this task force is made up of Archangel-class ships named after archangels referred to by name in the Old Testament." "Yes, Father Captain," prompted Admiral Aldecalde. "Your question?" "Just this, Admiral. I seem to remember that there were only 7 archangels referred to by name in the Bible. What about the rest of the Archangel-class ships that have come online?" There was chuckling around the circular table, and DeSoya could see that he had cut the tension much as he had planned. Smiling, Admiral Aldecalde said, "We welcome our prodigal captain back and inform him that the Vatican theologians have searched the Book of Enoch and the rest of the pseudo-epigrapha. Okay. We welcome our prodigal captain back and inform him that the Vatican theologians have searched the Book of Enoch and the rest of the Oh my gosh. Sudepigraphia. Sudepigrapha. Sudepic... Jesus Christ. No, literally. It is a word spelled P-S-E-U-D-E-P... I can't even spell it. P-S-E-U-D-E-P-I-G-R-A-P-H-A. Sudepigrapha. 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 Okay. Something like that. Smiling, Admiral Aldecocte said, "We welcome our prodigal captain back and inform him that the Vatican theologians have searched the Book of Enoch and the rest of the Sudepigraph." There it goes. Okay, so how much do I have to reread? Anyone know? Because I did not notice it cut out. I'm hoping it's no more than a paragraph or two. I really have to get a better line in to my microphone. I'm pretty sure that's the problem. Sound should be back. Okay, let me reread the last page or so, which unfortunately includes the cursed word. Let's do this cleanly. Father Captain de Soya raised his hand. I have to apologize, he said. I've been out of touch for several standard years, but I noticed that this task force is made up of Archangel-class ships named after archangels referred to by name in the Old Testament.
Yes, Father Captain, prompted Admiral Aldecati. Your question.
Just this, Admiral. I seem to remember that there were only 7 archangels referred to by name in the Bible. What about the rest of the Archangel-class ships that have come online? There was chuckling around the circular table, and Desoya could see that he had cut the tension much as he had planned. Smiling, Admiral Aldecati said,
We welcome our prodigal captain back and inform him that the Vatican theologians have searched the Book of Enoch and the rest of the pseudepigrapha to find these other angels which might be promoted to honorary archangel, and the Holy Office itself has authorized dispensation in Pax Fleet's use of their names. We found it, appropriate that the first 7 planet-class archangels built be named after those listed in the Bible and should carry their sacred fire to the enemy.
The chuckling turned to sounds of approval and finally to soft applause among the commanders and their execs. There were no other questions. Admiral Aldecati said,
Oh, one other detail. If you see this ship,
a hollow of a strange-looking starship floated above the center of the table. The thing was small by Pax Fleet standards, was streamlined as if built to enter atmosphere, and had fins near the fusion ports.
What is it?
Said Mother Captain Stone, still smiling from the good feeling in the room.
Some ouster joke?
No, said Father Captain Desoya in a soft monotone. It's web-era technology. A private starship, owned by an individual. A few executive officers chuckled again. Admiral Aldecati stopped the laughter by waving her thick hand through the hollow.
The Father Captain is correct, rumbled the Lucian Admiral. It's an old web-era ship, once owned by a diplomat of the hegemony.
She shook her head.
They had the wealth to make such gestures then. Anyway, it has a hawking drive modified by ouster technicians, may well be armed, and must be considered as dangerous. What do we do if we encounter it? Asked Mother Captain Stone. Take it as a prize? No, said Admiral Aldecati. Destroy it on sight. Slag it to vapor. Any questions?
There were none. The officers dispersed to their ships to prepare for the initial translation. On the Wasp Shuttle ride back to the Raphael, Exo Hogue Liebler chatted pleasantly with his new captain about the ship's readiness and crew's high morale, all the while thinking, I hope I don't have to kill this man. Sorry about the break in service. I apologize. I try to keep an eye on when that thing dies. I am not always on it. I really do have to get a better insulated cable. Anyway, geez, that means it was like a 10-minute gap or something. Whatever, we've got it in there now. My apologies. Yeah, so Friday should be a lock. Should be a lock on Friday. When I know what my schedule for next week is, I'll make it known. I should know in the next day or so. I'll get it in there. And we'll go from there. I know I will not be around next Tuesday. So Tuesday's out. So we'll see what happens. Anyway, hope people are enjoying. You probably all have gotten rather aggravated with my Aenea by now. Tough nuggins. You're going to just have to deal with it. But yeah, I'll see you all Friday and whenever next I see you. I should know by then when I will. And yeah, until then, stay safe, stay sane, stay toasty or cool as your geolocation or personal preferences permit. As your personal preference or geolocation permit, whatever. And be decent to each other. Until next time, toodaloo! Shoot, I'm going to have to update the playlists. I'll have to get around to that. I also have to look into a possible missing chapter in Artemis by Andy Weir. I've got to review some of that to see what happened there. I know I was having technical issues around then, so shrug. Anyway, until next time, thanks everyone.